Imagine for a moment that your year is not just a calendar, but a story. A story you are writing with your own actions. The first half of the year is like the soil before the harvest. It holds the seeds of everything you will achieve, everything you will become. If you neglect it, the opportunities will slip away quietly, almost imperceptibly. But if you work with focus, discipline, and intention, these months become the foundation of your success, your growth, your entire year. Today, I want to talk about why the first half of the year is not just time passing. It is destiny forming, and how the choices you make now will echo through the months that follow. Time is often perceived as a simple linear measure, marked by calendars and clocks, by months and days, yet it is far more profound than these instruments suggest. In truth, time is the very medium through which life unfolds, the invisible framework that shapes our actions, our opportunities, and ultimately our destiny. When we consider the year as a single organism, the first half assumes a crucial role. It is during these months, the months leading up to the midpoint of June, that the seeds of achievement are planted. The labor we invest now is not merely work in isolation. It is a signal, a trajectory, a mechanism by which we determine the texture of our own future. Human beings are temporal creatures. We live within the framework of past, present, and future. Yet paradoxically, we often neglect the profound influence of the present, of now, in shaping what is yet to come. The period before the midpoint of the year is, therefore, a unique intersection of potential, a threshold at which our efforts can either align with our ambitions or dissipate in wasted motion. History offers countless illustrations of this principle. Nations, civilizations, and individuals alike have risen or fallen, not purely because of inherent talent or fortune, but because of how they approached the early stages of their endeavors. In agriculture, the careful preparation of fields in spring determines the quality of the harvest in autumn. In the life of a student, the diligence of the early semester dictates the ease and mastery of examinations later on. In the realm of human enterprises, whether it be building a business, cultivating a skill, or nurturing a personal habit, the initial effort compounds. One may imagine the year as a vast river, flowing from January to December. The first half of this river is the source, the beginning, where currents are formed. If one merely drifts without purpose or exertion, the downstream journey becomes turbulent, directionless, and fraught with challenges. Conversely, if one rows with intention, using each day strategically, the momentum carries forward, smoothing the passage of the remaining months. This principle is not merely practical, it is philosophical. It touches upon the essence of human agency. We are not passive observers of time, we are active participants. Each day, each week, and each month is a decision point, a chance to influence the larger arc of our year. To work diligently before the midpoint is to acknowledge the inevitability of time's passage while asserting the power of our own choices. There is a biological underpinning to this as well. Humans are naturally prone to inertia, to delaying effort until urgency compels action. Psychologists describe this as present bias, the tendency to prioritize immediate comfort over long-term gain. Yet those who resist this bias, who consciously choose effort over ease in the early months, harness a form of temporal leverage. They exploit the compounding effect of consistent labor, allowing small, repeated actions to accumulate into substantial results. Consider a musician learning an instrument. The hours devoted to practice before June determine the proficiency achievable by December. Each neglected day represents not only lost skill, but a widening gap between potential and reality. The temporal distribution of effort, therefore, is not a trivial matter. It is the scaffolding upon which the entire year is built. From a socio-cultural perspective, societies have long recognized the importance of early diligence. Agricultural festivals, calendars of labor, and cultural rituals often emphasize preparation, planting, and effort at the beginning of the annual cycle. These traditions reflect an intuitive understanding that timing of work matters as much as the work itself. To ignore the early months is to invite the subtle erosion of opportunity. Yet, beyond tradition, there is an existential dimension. Life is short, and the perception of a year passing quickly is universal. Each day before June is an opportunity to act, to shape, to learn, and to achieve. If squandered, it cannot be reclaimed. The awareness of this finitude imbues early effort with moral and psychological significance. Working hard in the first half of the year is, in a sense, an ethical stance toward oneself. It declares that one will not be at the mercy of circumstance, that one will not allow the inertia of procrastination to define the outcome of their life. It is an assertion of autonomy, an affirmation that our actions, when directed intentionally, have consequences that echo across months. Moreover, the principle of early effort is deeply connected to human cognition. The brain, adaptive and plastic, thrives on repetition, practice, and exposure. Skills honed in the early months establish neural pathways that facilitate mastery later. Habits formed before the midpoint of the year create frameworks, or behavior that persist beyond initial effort. In this sense, working hard early is not only about immediate output, it is about shaping one's internal architecture, optimizing the mind and body to respond to future challenges. There is also a psychological momentum generated by early diligence. Success breeds confidence, confidence fuels action, and action reinforces success. The months leading up to June, therefore, are a critical period in which momentum can be established. Conversely, neglect or hesitation can result in stagnation, self-doubt, and the compounding effects of lost time. The consequences are not hypothetical, they are observable in countless personal and historical examples. Entrepreneurs who devote themselves to strategy, learning, and execution early in the fiscal year are far more likely to achieve their objectives. Athletes who train rigorously in the off-season or early months dominate later competitions. Students who establish a disciplined routine from the outset excel without the stress of last-minute effort. These patterns reflect a fundamental principle. The trajectory of a long-term endeavor is disproportionately influenced by initial effort. The first months of the year are not merely preparatory, they are determinative. This leads to a deeper insight. Time itself is not neutral. It rewards foresight, preparation, and labor. It does not penalize failure instantly, nor does it immediately elevate success, but it amplifies consistency, magnifies diligence, and reveals the consequences of neglect. The early half of the year functions as a magnifier, intensifying the outcomes of action and inaction alike. Recognizing this, one must adopt a mindset that treats each day as consequential, each week as formative. Work done now is not merely work, it is an investment in the unfolding months, a deliberate shaping of the year's narrative. To delay. Effort is to defer opportunity. An opportunity once missed rarely returns. This perspective transforms mundane tasks into profound acts. Writing a report, learning a skill, exercising, or even organizing one's schedule becomes a statement about the kind of year one intends to live. There is a temporal ethics embedded here. Effort in the early months is both a practical strategy and a philosophical affirmation. It acknowledges the power of human agency, the inevitability of time, and the responsibility to oneself. One might imagine the year as a living organism, and the months before June as its formative stage. The structure, strength, and vitality of this organism depend on the nurturing and effort invested during this critical period. Neglect leads to weakness, vulnerability, and inefficiency. Care, focus, and hard work result in resilience, adaptability, and flourishing. Yet, this understanding must be coupled with awareness of human limitations. Energy, attention, and focus are finite resources. It is not merely a question of working hard, but of working intelligently, prioritizing tasks that yield the greatest impact, and avoiding distractions that dissipate effort. Strategy and reflection must accompany labor. In other words, working before June is not an exercise in mindless toil, it is a deliberate, conscious engagement with one's potential and the unfolding months. The principle of early effort also intersects with societal dynamics. The world does not pause for individual timelines. Opportunities arise, change, and vanish rapidly. To delay personal action is to risk being overtaken by external circumstances. Those who act early position themselves advantageously, harnessing momentum while others are still organizing, hesitating, or procrastinating. The interplay between individual agency and temporal reality is therefore critical. One's decisions in the E. Early months influence not only personal outcomes, but the interactions and alignments with the world at large. There is furthermore a narrative dimension. Humans understand their lives as stories, and stories require structure, pacing, and development. The early months provide exposition, setting, and groundwork. Characters, skills, and objectives are introduced and cultivated. If this narrative foundation is weak or neglected, the climax, resolution, and achievements later in the year are compromised. By investing effort before June, one ensures that the story of their year is coherent, purposeful, and compelling. We can also consider the socio-cultural expectation and psychological phenomenon known as fresh start effect. Temporal landmarks, such as the beginning of a year, month, or week, provide an opportunity to reset behavior and recommit to goals. The months leading up to the mid-year represent a critical period for leveraging this effect. If one acts with discipline and intention, the fresh start catalyzes habit formation, productivity, and growth. If one squanders this period, the momentum is lost, and behavioral correction becomes increasingly difficult as time progresses. In contemplating the importance of early effort, it is crucial to acknowledge that effort alone is insufficient without direction. Work must be aligned with intention, skill, and strategy. To labor indiscriminately is to risk exhausting oneself without meaningful gain. The principle is not merely about effort. It is about the intelligent and deliberate application of effort to areas that determine the year's trajectory. In conclusion, the period before June represents a unique, formative, and consequential segment of time. It is a temporal window in which the alignment of human agency, effort, strategy, and awareness produces outcomes that reverberate through the remaining months. Neglecting this period is to invite randomness, stagnation, and unrealized potential. Embracing it, working diligently with intelligence and foresight, positions the individual to not only achieve objectives, but to cultivate habits, skills, and momentum that persist well beyond the midpoint of the year. Human achievement is rarely the product of sudden inspiration or isolated bursts of effort. Rather, it is the result of countless small decisions, repeated over days, weeks, and months, each one seemingly insignificant in isolation, yet cumulatively transformative. Discipline, understood not as rigid obedience, but as the conscious alignment of action with intention, is the engine that converts potential into reality. When we examine the lives of great thinkers, athletes, entrepreneurs, and creators across history, a pattern emerges. The extraordinary outcomes that capture our attention are almost always built upon ordinary acts, repeated consistently over time. This is a principle that transcends context, culture, and domain. A writer who composes a few hundred words each morning gradually produces novels that endure for generations. A musician who practices scales with quiet attention each day develops the precision and expression that mesmerize audiences. A student who studies for an hour daily rather than cramming the night before accumulates knowledge that forms the foundation for lifelong mastery. Consistency and discipline are therefore not merely habits, they are the infrastructure of excellence, the scaffolding that transforms aspiration into achievement. Yet, human nature is predisposed to resist this form of labor. The mind, ever inclined toward comfort and immediate gratification, struggles against the slow rhythm of cumulative effort. Motivation alone is insufficient. Fleeting bursts of enthusiasm rarely sustain meaningful progress. Discipline acts as the bridge between intention and action, a structured framework that ensures each day contributes to a larger trajectory. This bridge is built upon micro-actions, choices that are often invisible to the outside observer but deeply consequential. The act of waking early to study, the decision to train for 30 minutes despite fatigue, the resolve to draft a paragraph, revise a line, or analyze a problem. These moments, small in isolation, compound exponentially. The human brain itself is responsive to this process. Neural pathways strengthen with repetition, cognitive skills improve with deliberate practice, and habits, once established, reduce the friction of effort over time. The apparent simplicity of consistency conceals its profound neurological and psychological implications. It is the slow accumulation of effort that creates structural change within the individual, enabling levels of performance that initially seemed unattainable. Consider the analogy of erosion and sediment. A river, flowing persistently over rock, gradually carves valleys, shapes landscapes, and redirects courses that seem immutable. The force of water on a single day is imperceptible, but over time, it transforms the environment entirely. Similarly, the repeated application of discipline, sustained through daily actions, molds character, skill, and circumstance. Each small act is a droplet, almost invisible, yet together they reshape the terrain of a life. The subtlety of this process makes it psychologically challenging, because the effects of discipline are often delayed. Humans are wired to respond to immediate feedback. Rewards that are distant or incremental feel abstract and are easily devalued. This temporal gap between effort and visible result is precisely why consistency, rather than sporadic exertion, is crucial. Discipline allows the individual to navigate this gap, maintaining action despite the absence of immediate gratification, trusting that the accumulation of small acts will eventually manifest in profound outcomes. History is abundant with examples that illustrate this principle. The scientist who conducts experiments daily, noting small observations and recording meticulous data, eventually makes discoveries that redefine understanding. The athlete who adheres to repetitive training routines, often invisible to the public eye, attains feats of endurance and skill that awe spectators. Leaders who study strategy, history, and human behavior consistently over years develop the foresight and judgment that guide nations and organizations. Each of these examples is a testament to the power of discipline and consistent effort, demonstrating that what appears extraordinary is often the visible tip of a long and disciplined process. Furthermore, consistency fosters resilience. Life is unpredictable, filled with setbacks, distractions, and moments of doubt. The disciplined individual develops an internal rhythm, a structure that provides stability when circumstances falter. Daily actions create a feedback loop of competence, confidence, and incremental progress that shields against the psychological impact of failure. Even when external circumstances are adverse, the individual who has cultivated discipline continues to accumulate small advantages, positioning themselves for recovery and eventual success. The principle extends beyond individual accomplishment to interpersonal and societal dynamics. Small, disciplined actions influence relationships, reputation, and opportunity. Reliability, punctuality, and follow-through, repeated over time, build trust and credibility. These cumulative social effects can open doors that are inaccessible to those who act inconsistently, highlighting that the benefits of discipline are both personal and relational. There is a moral and philosophical dimension to this as well. Humans, aware of their limited time and mortality, are compelled to ask how best to allocate effort. Discipline and consistency provide an answer: the deliberate, repeated investment in meaningful action ensures that life's limited moments are not squandered. The cumulative nature of small acts transforms ordinary life into a deliberate narrative of growth, mastery, and fulfillment. It is not the magnitude of individual actions, but the constancy of their application that determines outcomes. To illustrate, consider a composer writing music. A single note written in isolation is meaningless. A single day of practice may seem trivial, yet the accumulation of notes, phrases, and disciplined hours produces symphonies that endure through centuries. Similarly, in any field, the aggregation of daily disciplined effort produces results that appear miraculous only when viewed in retrospect. Another aspect to consider is the psychological reinforcement that arises from consistency. Repetition fosters mastery. Mastery cultivates confidence, and confidence motivates further action. This creates a virtuous cycle where discipline not only produces tangible outcomes, but also strengthens the internal capacity to act. In contrast, sporadic effort produces uneven results, frustration, and discouragement, highlighting that discipline is both a means and an amplifier of human capability. Modern research in cognitive science and behavioral psychology reinforces these observations. Studies of habit formation, neuroplasticity, and performance show that consistent, deliberate practice leads to measurable improvements in skill, decision-making, and adaptability. The process of accumulating small actions reshapes the mind, making complex tasks easier, enhancing problem-solving ability, and fostering creativity. Discipline, therefore, is not merely a social or moral ideal, it is a mechanism by which the human organism optimizes itself over time. In practical terms, this principle demands a shift in perspective. Individuals must learn to value and prioritize SMA. LL. Repeatable actions over occasional grand gestures. The choice to complete a task today, to push through resistance, or to adhere to a schedule may appear mundane, yet it is precisely this mundane consistency that determines long-term success. It is the difference between those who drift aimlessly through a year and those who arrive at its end having achieved their objectives. Furthermore, consistency creates clarity. Repeated engagement with tasks, problems, and objectives illuminates patterns, reveals insights, and refines judgment. The disciplined practitioner is continuously learning, adjusting, and improving, often without conscious recognition. In contrast, intermittent or irregular effort obscures understanding, delays skill acquisition, and introduces error. Thus, discipline not only produces results, but also cultivates perception, awareness, and intelligence. This cumulative principle is visible in virtually every human endeavor. Farmers who tend their fields daily, attending to irrigation, soil, and planting, harvest abundance that eludes those who work sporadically. Artists who practice technique repeatedly develop expression and mastery that transcend initial talent. Scholars who study consistently accumulate knowledge that informs profound insight. Entrepreneurs who execute small daily actions on business development cultivate enterprises capable of long-term sustainability. These examples underscore a universal truth: the aggregation of small actions, maintained with discipline and consistency, produces life-altering results. Yet, it is essential to recognize that this process is neither mechanical nor automatic. Discipline requires conscious attention, reflection, and adjustment. The individual must decide which actions are meaningful, how to prioritize effort, and how to sustain engagement despite fatigue, distraction, or setbacks. Consistency without direction risks wasted energy. Discipline without reflection risks rigidity. Therefore, the practice of small, repeated actions must be coupled with intelligence, awareness, and purpose. There is also a temporal dimension to consider. Early action amplifies the benefits of consistency. The longer the period over which disciplined actions are maintained, the greater the compounding effect. Months of deliberate effort before a critical point in the year establish momentum that shapes outcomes long after initial effort. Conversely, delay or procrastination reduces the time available for cumulative advantage, creating pressure, stress, and diminished results. This reinforces the earlier point that discipline, practiced consistently and early, is a strategic investment in the trajectory of one's life. The implications extend beyond personal achievement. In organizations, societies, and communities, consistent, disciplined action produces systemic transformation. Institutions that cultivate regular processes, standards, and routines outperform those that rely on sporadic bursts of effort. Societies that value incremental improvement, education, and civic responsibility achieve stability and progress. In this sense, the principle of small, consistent actions is both a personal and collective law, reflecting the universality of temporal accumulation. Finally, the human experience demonstrates that discipline and consistency are deeply intertwined with identity. Repeated actions over time define who we are, shaping habits, values, and capabilities. The individual who practices, studies, creates, and contributes consistently becomes, by the accumulation of acts, someone distinct from who they were initially. Identity is not static. It emerges from repeated behavior, and behavior is shaped by the deliberate application of discipline. This understanding elevates daily actio from mere task completion to an existential process of self-construction. To work consistently, to practice discipline in small actions, is to engage in the creation of oneself, to sculpt character, skill, and destiny with the patient tools of repetition, focus, and commitment.